We now are turning our attention to our keynote speaker, who happens to be Henry Kaestner. It's a real treasure to have Henry with us. Henry's got a really impressive history, but even more important for what we're talking about today is a future that is going to be very impactful as Henry's opening doors for faith-driven entrepreneurs, investors, and all the downstream effects from there. In Henry's past, he was the co-founder, CEO, and then chairman for bandwidth.com, and also the company that spun out from that, which was Republic Wireless. Together, these companies hit $300 million of revenue, and one of them went public. After that, Henry founded and is co-managing partner of Sovereign's Capital, which is a private equity and venture capital management company that invests in faith-driven entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia and in the United States. And what Henry's doing is, after being a successful entrepreneur and then with his work through Sovereign's Capital as a successful investor, he's multiplying his effects as a thought leader. And so he's really a catalyst for faith-driven entrepreneurs and investors, bringing them together to do more good that's going to have not just a strong ROI, but a strong ROI for eternity. And so as a thought leader who's bringing together deal flow, bringing together intellectual capital, and really kind of spurring this movement, it's actually something to behold. So Henry, we're really glad to have you with us and eager to hear what you have to say. Thanks for joining us.
What a treat. That's so cool. You know, I wish that I had turned up the volume. I've got 3 teenagers that are studying at home. I wish I had turned up the volume more when you said thought leader. You're very, very kind. It's great to be with you. It's great to hear a little bit of Paul's presentation for what God is doing through him, and to hear Claire's awesome prayer. And just it's just the feeling that I had as I just joined was just super cool to be with men and women that are really serious about their faith and that are out in the marketplace in this awesome state. And because I think that a lot of you may wonder, where is Christian community in the midst of all this? And we see it with our churches, but it's really neat when you just get to know other Christian community. It's just a great encouragement. It really helps us to feel on mission. And at least it did this morning as I just processed the fact that I was with you guys. So thank you for having me. It's a great treat for me. So as Brian had mentioned, and thank you to Brian for inviting me and spending time with me over the last couple of weeks, just to helping me prepare. But as Brian did mention, my life calling is to work with faith-driven entrepreneurs primarily. Our hope at Faith-Driven Entrepreneur, which is a ministry, is to equip and activate 1 million faith-driven entrepreneurs around the world. It's a belief that we have that entrepreneurs are cultural change agents, that God uses them to bring about his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, for his glory, under his power. That entrepreneurs are not, to be clear, entrepreneurs are not the only ones that he uses. And yet there's something really special about an entrepreneur. And when I say entrepreneur, let me just pause there and just say that an entrepreneur, in my definition, my estimation, is any business owner at all, right down to a hot dog vendor, hot dog stand vendor, somebody who is ultimately reliant on creating, finding an opportunity, solving a problem, who can feel very, very alone at times in their mission field. People are looking to them for answers. Being a business owner and entrepreneur can be one of the loneliest vocations. It can be one of the most rewarding ones. What we like to do is we like to work with entrepreneurs and collectively just feel that there's a sense that some number of entrepreneurs and business owners who are serious about their Christian faith may go to church on Sunday and small group on Wednesday, but haven't yet been completely activated in their faith. And a lot of them might buy into the secular spiritual divide. They realize that, well, they don't want to come across as offensive in the marketplace. They think that it might compromise their ability to be more successful. And maybe they really view that their missions is to really to volunteer when they get back, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, or maybe to make money and then give that to missions. But our sense, our belief, of course, is that God has created business owners in his image. And we worship a God that works 6 out of 7 days. And the Gospel of John says his work continues to this day. And we believe that when we work, we indeed feel his pleasure, that he uses us as we solve problems and lean into opportunities. And 1 million faith-driven entrepreneurs awoken into that reality can be an incredible force for good and for the gospel around the world. And so that's what animates my life's work. There's some other things that plug into that, and I'll share with you just a little bit about that as well. But Brian, let me just do a time check, because I know we're starting at 8:40. What time would you like to close out my comments? And I think that you've said that we've got some Q&A at the very, very end, but just let me know what time we've got to right now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we could go up until about 9:10.
You got it. Awesome. All right, good. I got my clock in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, so it might be useful to provide you a little bit of autobiographical background with the hope that the way that God's used me and made an impact in my life might be something that might be an encouragement to you. And you might see some of that having matched up with how he's used you and where he's got you right now in the marketplace and where he might continue to use you. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. And I grew up in a family that was all about athletics. My father, my grandfather in the Lacrosse Hall of Fame, and lacrosse is the big deal in my family. 7 uncles who were high school All-Americans. And so when I was just an average lacrosse player, I knew that I needed to find some other identity. And I found that identity when I went to the school at the University of Delaware, and I discovered my first love. And that was that I could actually make a t-shirt for $5 and sell it for 10. It wasn't a girl. It was the fact I could sell t-shirts door to door on campuses. And by the time I got out of the University of Delaware, we had sales teams at 50 schools up and down the East Coast and as far west as Wyoming. And then also had a boxer short. Back then, this is the late 80s. I'm really dating myself. But back then, boxer shorts were a thing for girls as wearing as cover-ups for swimsuits, which is slightly bizarre as I think about it now. But we made tie-dye boxer shorts and sold them at Urban Outfitters in 120 stores. And I discovered my first love of entrepreneurship. I loved that. I felt alive when I did that. I had some legal problems, some copyright infringement problems. And my dad said, listen, pal, you can plead naivete when you're 20, but when you're 21, you got to have a real job. And so I had just seen the movie Wall Street. I don't know if you'll remember the original movie with Michael Douglas, but I wanted to be Bud Fox. I wanted to be the Charlie Sheen character. I want to have 2 phones up, and I want to be, saying buy, sell Eurobonds and stuff like that. I want to have Daryl Hannah as my girlfriend. I wanted to have an apartment with an exposed brick wall. And so I moved to New York City and pursued all the things that you might imagine somebody who is young, who does not yet have Jesus, might pursue. And it's just the old pithy, it's the old cliches that, you find that you try to fill your life with everything that might make you happy, and you have a God-shaped hole. And I ended up finding a lot of success on Wall Street, but I hadn't found God. Along the way, I did find my other true love, Kimberly, who I got engaged to, and we moved to North Carolina to start a business in the financial derivative space. And we stumbled into church one day. We had both grown up in a liberal Christian world, and which meant that, going to church was kind of like a moral social country club, and we're going to get married and have kids. So we thought we'd go check out a church, and walked in, and the guy was preaching the gospel as if he believed it was true. And he had the Bible, and he believed it was true too. And I had no place in my mind to just even make sense of that. How can somebody actually believe that the Bible is actually true? But I realized at the time, and I had gone on a run, and I thought, I could get up to heaven. And St. Peter's there for the entrance interview. And he's like, all right, Kaestner, when you're on earth, you read like 1,000 books, but you never cracked the cover of the best-selling book of all time. Can't let you in. Like, oh my goodness, it cannot go down like that. And so I got the Bible and said, I'm going to read it. But for those of you, if you're waking up early to listen to folks like me, you probably have read the Bible. And so you know how many pages are in it. And I'm like, I can't do that. It's way too many pages. I'm looking for my Bible right now. But of course, as you know, the New Testament is at the end. It's much thinner. I'm like, that's the Cliff Notes for the Bible. I knew enough to know that the New Testament was a Christian part, and I was ethnically Christian. So I read that. And actually, the first time through, it took me further away from faith. And but it was the second time I just was fascinated by it. Second time reading through, the Holy Spirit reached me, and I realized it was true. And if it was true, it changed everything, and it did. And so I came to faith. I ended up selling that company and then started this company called Bandwidth, which Brian was talking about. And Bandwidth was and is a telecommunications company. We had an idea. very early on, we want to be very intentional about our cultural values. And we knew that they needed to mirror who we wanted to be as individuals. And for David and I, it was faith first, then family, then work, and then fitness. David is a world-class endurance athlete. I'm a neighborhood class endurance athlete, but I like to work out too. And so that was the fourth most important thing. Work was the third most important. And that continues this day. We've got a couple of thousand employees, and family and faith are more important to our employees than work is. And yeah, work is important. Through the grace of God, we've been successful. But that type of cultural values was really important. It's really helped us, I believe, to succeed. 2.5 years in, we had spent through all of the money that I'd had from a prior exit. And we came out here to Sand Hill Road. We were living in North Carolina at the time, but came out here to Sand Hill Road and went up and down. And we didn't talk about our faith on the first visit and our, faith first, then family, work, fitness. And we surely didn't have fish on our business cards. But when it came around to a second or third meeting, we would tell these venture capital firms that, hey, you need to know that we've got this cultural values. Now, to be clear, we're going to hire the best person for the job. It's not going to be a holy huddle. But as you join our board, we're going to do things like pray before board meetings. And as we talked about that, we got a lot of blank stares with USVP, with Redpoint, Sequoia. And we went 0 for 40 in venture raises. Now, to be clear, there are a lot of reasons to not invest in us at the time. It wasn't just the faith, but we got some back channel at times that they didn't know what to make of the Christian guys. Did we know how to compete and win? Did we know how to fire people? I mean, just what is this sense of this business that wants to grow, but wants to do it to the glory of God? What in the world does that even mean? And it was a long, hard slog. In retrospect, we were being willful about raising money, not faithful. We ended up raising very little bit of money at the beginning, in increments as small as $15,000. And it was a long, hard slog. 2.5 years of trying to raise money in very small increments. But through the grace of God, we ended up becoming the fourth fastest growing privately held company in the country over a 5-year stretch in the early 2000s. And through that time, we've had a lot of success, and we've come to understand, of course, and this is something you all know, that Christian-led businesses can compete and win, but the secular world, the funding world, doesn't always know what to make of that. And so we decided, ironically, because we never raised venture capital, but we decided that, especially in talking to some other entrepreneurs who had really felt this pressure for this secular spiritual divide, like, yes, I'm a Christian, but I don't want my employees to think I'm this or my customers to think I'm that. We really believe that if we could come alongside these young men and women and put skin in the game with them, to invest in them, to bring to bear our operating experience, but then also capital, and to pray for them and to put together a spiritual integration plan, that they might be used by God for cultural transformation. And that in doing so, we might also have a venture fund that could be a top quartile fund. And so we set out to start Sovereign's Capital, and that was 10 years ago. And fast forward on, we've had 3 funds now. Fund 1, that first fund, is a top quartile fund for funds in the 2011 vintage. And we're grateful for the success that God has granted us as we come alongside these men and women and help them to compete and win and do it for the glory of God. And we do that in Southeast Asia, in Singapore and Indonesia, and then, of course, the United States, where we invest in venture opportunities, but then also increasingly in lower to middle market opportunities, primarily in the Southeast for that. 3 or 4 years in, we found our first problem. Actually, I got some counsel from some guys that I knew that were Christian early on that worked in some big Silicon Valley firms. They had said originally they thought that Sovereign's Capital was a terrible, horrible idea. And I said, why? They said, you have to understand that 80% of venture firms don't succeed, and they can invest in anything they want. How in the world are you going to be able to have a successful venture fund that only can invest in 10 or 12% of all the deals that are out there? And I didn't have a good answer for that. We decided to persist anyway because we felt like we were called to it. But we came to find with time that, of course, that the most important thing in a venture fund is deal flow. And the word started getting out to those 10 to 12%, to be clear, a minority, but to those 10 to 12% where like-minded capital is important, that there's a fund that invested in entrepreneurs like them. And so we started getting just a ton. After a lean first 2 years, we started getting a ton of deal flow. We end up saying no and continue to say no to 99 out of 100 businesses that come to us. Well, that's no different from, Battery or Sequoia. But when you get into this space because you want to be an encouragement to faith-driven entrepreneurs and you say no that many times, you're not being an encouragement. And so we started a ministry called Faith-Driven Entrepreneur to be able to hopefully minister and encourage the entrepreneurs that we couldn't invest in. And some of them were wrong stage, wrong industry that we just didn't know, wrong geography. And so it started off with a podcast, and now it's a ministry with folks that participate in more than 140 countries. We've got a daily blog, a weekly podcast, a monthly newsletter, an annual conference, and we've had a lot of fun with it. It's been we think super cool. I really do enjoy the ministry. We've got about 12 people now in the ministry, which we get through the grace of God, just get a chance to fund out of what God has allowed us to do at Bandwidth. And so we don't raise money, but we get a chance to minister to these different entrepreneurs. And then as a part of what we do, we also look to fund out of our foundation and then do this in conjunction with other donors and other foundations into some incredible ministries that minister and encourage faith-driven entrepreneurs around the world. Organizations like Praxis and Ocean and Synapis and Bluefields in Brazil and Etzinia in Sweden and First Fruits in Israel. Different ministries that really lean into the fact that entrepreneurs can be these cultural change agents, kind of like the early 1800s, all the entrepreneurs that came out of the Clapham Circle movement, where Wilberforce was and William Penn was. And so so that's what we do with Faith Driven Entrepreneur. But along the way, we came to understand is we have all these entrepreneurs come to us, that when an entrepreneur is looking for $250,000 or $500,000 in debt or equity capital, and you send them a link to a podcast, you haven't really scratched their itch. They appreciate it, they love it, but they're still looking for capital. And so a couple of things kind of converged. One was we, about 2.5 years ago, thought about launching a real estate fund at Sovereigns. We came to understand that there are a couple of faith-driven multifamily real estate managers. And I thought, well, let's go ahead and put some of our family office money there. And if we do that, maybe there's an opportunity for fun. But then we looked at that a little bit and realized that we were probably not the right people to run a real estate fund, because I still can't calculate a cap rate, which is not that hard to calculate, but I should definitely not be running a real estate fund. And so we thought, well, there are other people that could know real estate. Maybe they should run real estate funds. And maybe there are other people that should be running private equity funds that are focused on spiritual integration. And so we started a ministry to try to encourage the development of an industry of faith-driven investors, new funds that might form across different asset classes, private equity, public equity, in real estate, domestic and overseas. And we started to invest in them out of our family office. And now we've invested in something like 35 different funds, all of which have an active gospel proclamation to it. Because we realized that for a long time, when we'd come across a Christian that was an accredited investor or an institution, would say, we've got this fund and we'd love to have you participate, and here's how the fund's done, et cetera. But we got convicted a couple of years ago by the Holy Spirit, I believe, that we were being too closed about that, not open-handed enough. I got a book. I used to serve on a board of a ministry called Hope International, and it's led by a guy named Peter Greer, and he wrote a book called Rooting for Rivals. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Ministry should absolutely do that. But what does it look like for us at Sovereigns? And so we decided that we wanted to go back to our LPs and to encourage them to look to other things that they might do to invest outside of Sovereigns. And we made it an initiative and hired some people to go out there and find different funds that already existed that had spiritual integration, most of them being in real estate, to help other funds get started. And there have been some funds started now in this space that are really amazing. Insian Wang has left Warburg Pincus, where he ran their healthcare practice for 14 years, one of the best healthcare investors in Wall Street, to set up Ascend, which is a fund. They just did a $270 million first close. They have $80 million from Zuckerberg Chan. They have a pastor on board. They've got a seminarian on staff. They're loving on small physician practices in the greater New York metropolitan area, primarily and lower to middle income areas, and just bringing the gospel, doing some incredible investing. Victor Hugh, over the course of the last year, has left Goldman Sachs, where he started their ed tech practice and started an ed tech fund. And he has incredible spiritual integration. We have demo days at Faith Driven Investor every 2 weeks, where we have one fund that has spiritual integration they present, and then 4 or 5 of these individual companies that are on the Faith Driven Investor marketplace, which maybe I'll mention in a second. And Victor talked about this new fund he has with Goldman Sachs as his largest LP, but how he's hired a chaplain to be able to love on the secular CEOs in his portfolio. And so you have old funds that had already exist primarily in real estate, new funds that are starting. And then one of my favorite sectors is older funds that have been around that are being retrofitted with spiritual integration. A good example of that is Eric Kim and Chihuahua Chen at Goodwater Capital. Always been believers and always been ready to share the reason for the hope they have, but never really having integrated into their fund, which has more than $1 billion of assets under management, one of the best tech-enabled consumer goods funds in the world, probably the best one. Chihuahua had come out of Kleiner and Eric out of Maverick. And they recast their fund in light of Micah 6:8 last January, and hired Dave Gibbons to be a pastor chaplain for their secular CEOs. And so Aslan is on the move in the investor world. We've on our podcast, so we have the Faith Driven Entrepreneur podcast, we have the Faith Driven Investor podcast too. We've had Trey Stevens on from the Founders Fund talking about how his Christian faith informs his contrarian investment style. You might be familiar with the book that his partner Peter Thiel wrote called 0 to 1, about being a contrarian investor. And Frank Chin from Andreessen Horowitz talking about how his Christian faith informs the way that he loves on his portfolio companies and loves on the entrepreneurs that they say no to. Frank Chen sees it as his ministry calling to love on entrepreneurs that they say no to. They have a net promoter score on companies that come to them from funding and they say no to, and something like 75 or something crazy. But again, he's motivated by his Christian faith to love his neighbor where he is. And there are just an increasing number. Again, we've invested out of our family office into 35 of them. Guys like Richard Okello, who was a partner with Ray Dalio at Bridgewater, left to go start a fund 8 or 9 years ago in Johannesburg. Again, great spiritual integration, incredible investor. 5 different Ivy League educated fund managers, all serious about their Christian faith in Africa alone. And 2 years ago, I didn't think anything was going on. I'm telling you, I thought Sovereign's Capital was the only game in town. So that's Faith Driven Entrepreneur, Faith Driven Investor. And then the other thing we've realized that kind of the thing that really has a hold on an entrepreneur's heart and an investor's heart is money. And I told you about how I came to faith at 28. At age 38, I'm 51 now, so this is 13 years ago. Kimberly and I started giving away more money. Bandwidth was becoming increasingly successful. We were probably giving away 20% at the time. And I thought there's probably a special place in heaven for the double tither. You know, get box seats to Angels games, or there's something in it. I don't know what it is, but it's coming to us. And I met this guy named Daryl Heald, who started a ministry called Generous Giving. And he said, I told him about some of the different ministries we're giving to, and we started some in North Carolina, and feeling kind of proud about myself, if I'm honest. And he's just very patient listening. And then he asked me this question that I'll never forget. He said, "Henry, why do you give?" And I'm like, why do I give? Why do I give? I have a lot of money. I want to pay it forward. I kind of stumbled through something that was probably like theologically like C-. And it's not like he gave me a grade or anything like that, but over the next 6 months, it seemed like everything I read in the Bible had something to do with money. And actually, interestingly, the passage that had the biggest impact on my walk with Jesus, and this all became all about my walk with Jesus, it became not about money. It just, I realized that Jesus had 20% of my heart. And as I was going through the Bible, the passage actually that made the biggest impact on me about money was something that most people think that has nothing to do with money at all. It's when Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed 5,000. And I'm like, oh my goodness, God actually doesn't need my money. He just wants my heart. And up in that point, I thought, God's given me success because he needs me to fund these different things. And it wasn't true. Now, as Kimberly and I have the opportunity to give more than we had given in the past, we come so much more alive in our faith in a counterintuitive way that gives us a life, gives us joy in our walk with the Lord that is awesome. And so we have a big part of our life is to encourage other Christ followers in their walk with the Lord through how they think about money and participating in the work that God is doing in the world, like you heard. And this is the preaching to the choir moment. You guys get that. You're waking up, you're giving up your time to hear from ministries like we just heard about from Paul. You get that. But Generosity Bay Area is a ministry we started that's meant to help people in the Bay Area to discover the joy of giving through answering the question, why give? We do that through something that many of you have probably gone through called a journey of generosity. And then we as a community get together and talk about where we might give and how we might give in a way that participates in the work that God is doing in the world and brings us joy as givers and participating in it. Whether it's looking at church planting or youth discipleship or sports ministry or clean water or microfinance. And we want the Bay Area and by extension in California and Sacramento, we want Christ followers to be known for their radical generosity. The church grows. There's a great book, if you ever get it, Rodney Stark, called The Rise of Christianity. The church grows when the church is much different in its generosity than the rest of the world. And he shows it all through the last 2,000 years. It's, the Emperor Julian talking about, these Christians, they take care of their poor, which is a radical concept, and ours as well. Talking about the Christians taking care of the poor, the abandoned babies and taking care of the poor in the bubonic plague. When that happens, the rest of the world notices, like, these Christians are radically different in the way they give. They've got something I want. Our hope is that in the Bay Area, that Christians are known for their radical generosity. We just commissioned a multi-city study on generosity to establish a baseline about where Christians give. And the good news is that Christians that go to church regularly do give much more than the rest of society. This is not the case, by the way, in a lot of other places, but and actually do outgive secular givers outside the church. I had feared, and we just got these results a couple of weeks ago, I'd feared that Christians gave primarily to the church to keep the lights on and to ministries, which are all very important, we know. But as a result of that, didn't give as much outside other ministries that impacted the rest of the community. Fortunately, in the Bay Area, that's not the case. And yet, it's only negligible how much Christians give outside of the church versus secular givers. It's a little better. So our hope is to be able to encourage people in their walk with the Lord, so that might be radically different in such a way that there's revival. Last thing I want to mention to you as I close out my time, I'm looking at the clock, is that there are some different principles and values that we've come to understand over the last 20 years or so in working with faith-driven entrepreneurs. First is one, and then over the last 10 years at Sovereigns and Faith-Driven Entrepreneurs Ministry, that I want to leave you with, that I hope that you might be able to test in your own lives. But then you're all leaders in your community, and my hope is that you might encourage other business owners at your churches and your communities. The first, and we've got them up on our website. And we have this 8-week video series we do where we've got a 2.5 minute kind of video documentary on a Christian business, and then we've got some teaching from a guy named J.D. Greer. And then we do this kind of small group study, but it goes through these 8 marks and principles. And they include things, and this is the most important one, it's the first one. Well, the first one's called called to create. So an entrepreneur leans into the fact they're creating an image of a creative God. Number 2, though, is the most important. It's identity in Christ. Most entrepreneurs, and this is definitely the case in my life, most entrepreneurs end up having their business become their identity. They never answer it that way. And if you gave them a multiple choice test about, can you earn your own salvation or not, they never answer that wrong either. And yet they live their lives as if that might be the case. And the hope that we have through our ministry, and for all of us, and this is, preaching to myself again every single day, is that our deepest identity will be not as a telecom guy or as a real estate guy or finance guy, whatever, that our deepest identity will be as a beloved child of God. And that we will receive that gift, and that will become our deepest reality. That we've been given the gift of life, now and eternal, from a God who loves us. And when he sees us, he sees his perfect Son. When that seeps in and becomes our deepest identity, then we have an opportunity to return to the altar with all that we have out of gratitude. And the energy we have from that becomes attractive to others. Our identity is not as this real estate guy or as this telecom guy. And that allows us to have an advantage over the rest of the secular world because we have something that other people want and we experience a joy. So identity in Christ is important. We talk a lot about ministry in deed. We talk about ministry in word. We talk about being sent. We talk about excellence. We talk about generosity. But the most important thing, and really is the cornerstone of our ministry, is this identity in Christ, which I hope and pray for myself, for each of you. Awesome being with you guys. Brian, thanks for having me. Baller Who, thanks for thinking of me too, and just grateful for your ministry.
Yeah, Henry, thank you so much for your words. Those are words that were, Jesus rooted, very thoughtful, resulting in, inspiring vision and, terrific execution as well. All of that. Thanks for your words. And even more than that, Henry, thanks for the way you're living your life, as a role model, as a catalyst, and as a connector, through so many other things you're doing. So we're really, thank you very much. You can't hear the roaring applause right now. Everyone's on mute, but it was terrific. Thank you.